asking a couple of questions to help us figure out some things about sustainability for the conference. So please, once you get your food at lunch, be prepared to hear a couple of questions for you to write down some notes. The first speaker this morning is Dilshad D. She's an autism mom, blogger, activist, and a 2015 White House Champion of Change. She'll be discussing the challenges autistic Muslims face in their own communities, and what resources are available to help librarians support this population. So please welcome Dilshad. Yeah, but I got to go to the other side.
I'm going to start with some apologies. I'm keeping my jacket on because I'm really cold. And I'm fighting a cold. And it's Ramadan and I'm fasting, so I'm really not 100%. But I've worked on this for a long time. So we'll go through the presentation. I'm sure everything's going to go fine. So apologies if I cough or anything in the middle. But so, please have a seat. We'll just look where we are. Top left for you. Thank you. So a caveat, this is a conference on targeting autism and that's what the focus is. But something to note is that when it comes to Muslim communities and autism and disabilities, I would say in the past 5 years to a decade has there been an increased focus on organizations and targeted programs and practices that help Muslims with disabilities, not specifically Muslims with autism. We're not that narrow yet. We're still out here. We're still out here working to kind of catch up to Jewish and Christian communities and really kind of get our head in the game as to how we can keep our places of worship and people with Muslims and disabilities to feel more included in communities at large. So you're going to hear me talk about, I'll probably use the word disabilities a lot more than autism because we're just not that narrow yet. But wherever we're working on disability and inclusion, autism is part of that. It's a big part of that. So I just wanted to start with that. So there's going to be 3 areas of focus I want to talk about today in this presentation. One is a quick little bit of information on Islam and Muslims and the theology of disabilities and how we view autism and disabilities and stuff from a theological kind of viewpoint to kind of give you guys an idea of what might be said in scripture, what might be said in our communities regarding disabilities and autism. The second part, I want to go over our practices, resources, and disability and autism-focused organizations. And this part I think is important because one of the areas I think here in library systems where we could improve is coming together with a good amount of resources that are important to different pockets of our communities, right? So maybe targeted resources that are important for African Americans, targeted resources that are important for Latino communities, targeted resources that are important for Muslim communities. And we do have a lot of good organizations that have developed in the past decade or so. So the second part, I will focus on that. And the last part I want to get into is a little bit about the trifecta of Muslims, autism, and libraries, kind of who the stakeholders are, what the stereotypes and misconceptions are, what are some of the unique stereotypes and misconceptions that as Muslims we face, which might hinder us into how we interact in a library or in another public setting, and what we can do about that. So that's how I want to proceed. So let's start with a number, 600,000. Estimated number of Muslims living with disabilities in the United States according to a 2014 survey by Enabled Muslim, which is it's not an active group anymore, but it's a group of the American Muslim health professionals that I was a founding member of. and we conducted a national survey back in 2014 to really kind of gauge the landscape of Muslims with autism, Muslims with disabilities, cognitive, intellectual, physical, and all of that. How many of us are there out there? You know, no one really talks about it. So through our survey, we came up with 600,000. 1/3 of all U.S. families have a family member living with a disability. There are 3 million Muslims in the United States. 1/3 of us have a disability. You know, the statistics don't change depending on what group you're from. So let's talk a little bit about Islam and Muslims and the 411 on how disability and autism is perceived in our theology. So obviously Islam is the name of our religion. It's a set of beliefs and values and practices. We're not a culture. We accommodate different cultures. So when we say we're not a monolith, it means that, you know, Islam is Islam, Christianity is Christianity, Buddhism is Buddhism. But there are many different cultures that adhere to Islamic practices. You could be Arab, South Asian, East Asian, American, Black Muslim, so many different cultures that dovetail into the religion. Muslim is the person who believes in Islam, and there are approximately 1.5 billion of us in the world, of only which 15% are Arab. So Arab Muslims are not the dominant population, actually. Indonesia is the largest country with Muslims in the world. Estimated 3.3 million Muslims or more in the United States, and we're a very racially diverse community, including many Black, white, and Latino American converts. Majority of the African slaves who were brought to America were Muslim. When it comes to the Quran, there are a couple of passages that specifically target disability, which will include autism as well. So I put a few up there. One is from 43:52, when the Pharaoh said, "Or am I not better than this one who is insignificant and hardly makes himself clear?" It's referring to the story of Pharaoh and Moses, and that Moses had a speech impediment. And then another quote, another passage that says, from Moses, which is something that I refer to a lot in my own work. "Expand for me my breast with insurance, and ease for me my task, and untie the knot for my tongue, that they might understand my speech." So there's quite a few passages in the Quran that refer to disability from that perspective. Also, the passage where it says, "No blame is there upon the blind, nor any blame upon the lame, nor any blame upon the sick," which is actually a pretty important passage for us to reflect upon in our religion, because that is an issue that has been there for a long time. You know, stigmatizing people with disability, hiding them, not, you know, including them in daily actions of daily living. Why? There's no blame upon anybody. There's no reason to do that nonsense. Another aspect to realize about disability in Islamic theology, that God is fair. Everyone born with a clean slate, accountable for only their actions and beliefs. This ties into the idea, which is unfortunate, that too often people in some Muslim communities view disability as a curse, or autism as a curse, which is awfully ridiculous. Not an indicator of anyone's anger or punishment or anything bad that you did. It's silly that I even have to say this, but it's something that we still struggle with in pockets of our communities. Another, you know, thing that often I struggle with and come across is the idea that suffering is a means of spiritual growth. "Seek me among your weak, for you are granted sustenance on account of the weak among you." You know, theology and scripture is interesting. I mean, it's written a certain way, and I understand the crux of it, but sometimes I struggle with it because I don't want to refer to my child as weak, or that he's suffering as a means for me to grow. But, you know, these are things we contend with in our faith. So the practical implications that come from these beliefs. Responsibility for what one has been blessed with. So from the Bible, from everyone to whom much has been given, much will be required. That is similar in Islam as well, gratitude and its theological centrality in Islam. So part of gratitude is the ability to use what has been given to us. Part of it is patience in what we are living with. Part of it is respect and love for others. This is all part of our religion, and part of our faith, and part of our culture. And these are implications, and these are things that often, I think too often, Muslims still fail to remember and remind themselves of. And it trickles down to how we interact with each other in our places of worship, or in our community centers, or in our communities at large, unfortunately. In our faith, we have moral obligations towards those with special needs, giving time, giving assistance, support, accessibility and integration. None of you has faith until he loves for his brother what he loves for himself. Whoever is leading the congregational prayer should make it light, for verily among them are the ill, the weak, and those in special circumstances. Like, don't make things too difficult. Make it easy so that everyone can be a part of it. Two people should not converse to the inclusion of a third. That speaks directly to inclusion, These are things that are embedded in our faith and that I think all too often are glossed over, or not given enough importance. So let's move on to talking about some practices and resources, disability and autism awareness and accommodations in the American Muslim communities. I want to talk about active groups and organizations that are out there right now on the ground doing things. And again, I know we're here to talk about autism. A lot of these groups are going to be focused on an array of disabilities, including autism, but I think it's important to mention that because, like I mentioned at the start of this, we're just not that narrow enough yet. And so I have to open up the range for us here. So thankfully, there's actually a number of organizations out there that are working on these issues, and they've all sprung up and done a lot of good things in the past decade or so. I wrote this article about 8 or 9 years ago about the lack of inclusion for autistic individuals in American Muslim communities. It was kind of like a cry for help and an anger piece that came out during Autism Awareness Month around 8 years ago. And to look at that now and to see where we are now, we're nowhere near where we want to be, but we're so much better, and it's so nice to see that. So over the years, several organizations have developed, and they're focusing on a variety of areas that serve different audiences, primarily either Muslims with disabilities or anyone with a disability. So we have organizations that focus mainly on the Muslim communities, and we have Muslim-led organizations that are open to everyone with disabilities, autism included. So focus on disabilities in general, on mental health. Some are focused on specific disabilities or in specific geographical areas. So when we talk about disability or autism organizations that are primarily focused just on American Muslim communities, one of the biggest ones out there, which is right here in Illinois, is Muslim. And has any of you all heard of this organization? Muslims Understanding and Helping Special Education Needs. You've heard of it, one person. One is more than none, so that's good. If there's anything you take away from today, please note this organization. This is right here in Illinois. It's based in Chicago. The executive director's name is Juhi Taher, and she is a tour de force. Let's be honest, I'm also on the board of this organization. I serve on the board of this organization, but they are fantastic. And they're right here in Illinois, and so they're a fantastic resource for you. So this is a nonprofit striving to promote awareness, acceptance, and inclusion in Muslim communities and mosques. They have a fantastic mosque certification program where they have put together a list of things that they want mosques to do to make their buildings physically inclusive, as well as programming and changing attitudes and things that they do. Back in Richmond, the mosque that we have worked on to build for 10 years now just opened this year. And while they're not Muslim certified, which I'm still working on that, just by being active in this whole process, we have a room that we started out calling the quiet room, and I changed it to the anything goes room. If you're in congregational prayers and it's really not kind of working for you, there's an area of the mosque where you can go where anything goes. Pray however you want, be as loud as you want, be quiet, whatever you need. Those are things that are lacking. In our bathroom, wudu friendly stations where we do our ablutions that can be accessible to anyone with any type of physical disability. We have that now at our mosque. Of course, we have ramps to be ADA compliant, but just in programming and other stuff, it's all getting going. And their mosque certification program, Muslims, is really phenomenal. I believe they have, I want to say, between close to 40, I think, certified across the country. And they're working in the UK now, so that's one part of it. Another great thing they're doing is called the Muhsin Umrah. This is their 3rd year they're doing it. You know, Hajj is our annual pilgrimage to Mecca that a Muslim will do once in their lifetime. Umrah is a smaller version of that a Muslim can do at any time in their life, should they want to or not want to, as many times as they want to. And one of the hardest things are for families with autism and other disabilities to be able to do that. You leave your loved one behind, you bring them with them. If you bring them with them, how the heck are you supposed to navigate Saudi Arabia in this situation, right? Mohsen has put together a program where they've taken a group for 2 years now. This is their 3rd year, and it's fantastic, you know? These are things that are available that I don't think the community at large knows about. They've developed Sunday school curriculum. They've partnered with SEMA on a mental health initiative. They've partnered with Hafardeen on marriage services in our community. They offer respite programs, which is so cool because until now, any time I wanted to take part in a respite program, it was generally a buddy program at our local church in Richmond. I mean, Muslim's not in Richmond, so I can't avail their services yet, but they are in pockets of the country. They're mainly strong here in Chicago, and then they have a good chapter going in Dallas. They have one going in DC. They have one out in LA, I think, and in other pockets around the US. So we're not that strong yet in Richmond, but here they're doing some fantastic stuff. They have workshops and volunteer trainings. They do a team walk each year with Autism Speaks, and they do their own team walk. And fundraising event, they provide Braille Qurans and closed captioning devices to masjids around the country if you want to need that. So they're doing a lot of fantastic things. And I think this is an organization that is really important to note, to include when you're trying to come up with resources to have in library settings for when people come in and want to know stuff and want to know what's out there. This is one of them. Disability organizations that primary focus on American Muslim communities also include Global Deaf Muslims. Again, I know we're talking about autism today, but I kind of want to give you a wide gamut of what's out there because we're not that big. Global Deaf Muslims is a nonprofit that advocates for the rights and needs of deaf Muslims worldwide and particularly strives to improve accessible Islamic education and programming for those who are hearing impaired. They have a project they're working on where they're signing the entire Quran, and I believe they have that available online. Great thing to have available for people to access in libraries. Enabled Muslim, like I said, is not active anymore, but it was part of the American Muslim Health Professionals. And the American Muslim Health Professionals, also based in Chicago, you guys have a lot of great stuff here. They do a lot of great work in the realm of disability and mental health and things like that. It's an online network providing spiritual or faith-based and practical support for Muslims impaired by disabilities, including intellectual and physical and autism. And now we're going to talk about some disability organizations that are founded and led by Muslims, but they serve all people. So one fantastic one is Equally Able Foundation. This is a nonprofit that seeks to empower and include people with disabilities worldwide. They provide education, employment, medical equipment, innovative technology, and a lot of grants to promote outreach and promote inclusion and religious community supports. I've been a big speaker at the ISNA, Islamic Society of North America, at their convention for many, many years. I've been on panels with Equally Able's founder, and a fantastic organization, wonderful work that they do. ETI is empowerment through integration. So this is for visually impaired. It's a nonprofit that propels disadvantaged, blind, and sight impaired youth to explore and achieve career goals. And they have programs in the US and in Lebanon. They do a lot of great work with vision impaired, Braille Qurans, and other things as well. So another good program to be aware of, or organization to be aware of, to include when you're trying to amass different lists of different organizations and different things that Muslims could have access to that come into your libraries. And then these are organizations that are serving mental health needs of American Muslim communities. We have the Muslim Wellness Foundation, which works to reduce stigma associated with mental illness, addiction, and trauma. And one of the really cool things that they did was they instituted one of the first Imam mental health training programs in the United States. Again, we're really poor at advertising what we're doing. I just don't think people know about these things, and I think people should know about these things and know that this is out there and that you can get more information about it. And well, where would you go to get information? You go to the library. So I think it's really important for you all to know this and like have these information and these organizations at your fingertips. So Nasiha Muslim Helpline is a confidential youth helpline that gives immediate, anonymous, and confidential support over the phone. They act as a suicide hotline as well, which is a really important area for us because there's just too much stigma around suicide and being able to openly talk about suicidal thoughts. And this hotline is there to help with that. Stones to Bridges is dedicated to empowering and supporting the needs of Muslims and other youth in North America by promoting emotional, social, and mental well-being. And the Family and Youth Institute is another wonderful, wonderful organization. I can't remember where they're based out of. It's either DC or it's here in Chicago, I can't remember. They're a non-profit research and education institution that helps young people and their families realize fullest potential through the development of mind, body, and spirit. So they also work on suicide prevention, they work on trauma. They're actually in the school systems a lot, working on programs of bullying and trauma and suicide. We've had an uptick in suicides happening in some Islamic schools around the country due to bullying, and they work on those things as well. They also work on trauma when it comes to school shootings and other things like that. So also a great organization to know about. We also have a number of disability and autism organizations in Canada and the UK, which I know is maybe not as important to us here, but since we're talking about all organizations at one time, I thought I'd bring this up as well. SMILE is in Canada. They're dedicated to providing support and developing awareness of the challenges faced by children living with disabilities, and a big focus on autism in Muslim communities in Canada. The Canada Association for Muslim with Disabilities, they focus on community-based approaches to meet the needs of Canadian citizens with disabilities and their families. And then in UK, there's the Disabled Muslim Network, which works to support and assist Muslims with disabilities and Muslim parents of children with disabilities through mosque inclusion programs, through respite programs, through education and things like that. So a lot of organizations out there that I'm sure you guys don't know about, and so it's good to know about these things. But when we come to the trifecta of Muslims, autism, and libraries, you know, there's a lot to navigate there about how we can bring Muslims into library systems, how we can venture out of libraries to, you know, draw in more stakeholders. So we're going to talk about that now. So how do Muslims, autism, and libraries intersect? Here, pictures of my kids, because why not? They're so cute. That's my son Danish, and that's his brother Hamza, and that's him with his genius burning, because he loves to do artwork. So I know you all already know this as well, but it was helpful to me when I was thinking about this trifecta of autism, Muslims, and libraries, to break down the classic misconceptions, and then how do those two intertwine. And you guys already know this classic misconceptions that cross all demographic groups about libraries. You know, things that I still used to think about. That libraries are for reading and they're for quiet research, emphasis on quiet. One of the reasons why I never, ever, ever took my son into a library, I'm like, there's no way. Danish is a loud guy all the time. He's moving and he's loud. There's no way I'd ever take him into a library. That libraries don't have much to offer beyond a vast variety of fiction and nonfiction. For Muslims, they don't have the resource materials that we want. But now I've just showed you all the organizations out there so you can have the resource materials. That library programs are only geared towards young children. Another thing, I copped to this. You know, my son is now 18. Another reason why I dropped trying to go to libraries is like, what is there going to be there for him now? However, in his school, they go to libraries all the time, and I'm like, what do you guys do there? You know, like, what's out there for him? And that library activities are only geared towards children and teens. I think these are some of the classic misconceptions. Now let's look at the classic misconceptions about Muslims. That we're mainly an immigrant community rather than a vast range of first and second generation Muslim Americans. That we're mainly from the Middle East. Also not true. The United States has a huge population of Muslims who are converts to Islam, South Asian, Arab, East Asian, all sorts. That Muslims are identifiable by their headscarves, clothing, or perhaps beards on men. Also not true. I wear a headscarf, but my mom doesn't. You know, we're all out there. We all don't necessarily look Muslim. That we have language barriers. For some, yeah, possibly, but for a lot of us, no. You know, we're quite fluent in English. It's our first language. not a problem. So then issues facing the intersection of Muslims and Muslims with autism in public spaces. And I'm dialing it back to just talk about public spaces in general, which include libraries. So what are those autism-related challenges? You know, behavior challenges in social settings, or sensory issues where one might, maybe they need to be quiet in certain situations, or maybe they need to be able to navigate situations with people in crowds. Maybe it's about reading social cues. Maybe it's about challenges with waiting and engaging and interacting with others, specifically waiting. Or maybe it's how behaviors are perceived in a public setting, you know? We're working in an area right now where we're trying to not necessarily shape the behavior to accommodate the situation, but to create more awareness so that you understand that different types of behaviors are accessible in all situations. And a big one, fear and pride of asking for help across cultures, especially Arab, Desi, and Black Muslim cultures. You know, we don't like to ask for help. You know, we don't like to appear looking vulnerable or to feel like we don't know what we're doing, or basically don't like to ask for help. And what are some of the challenges that Muslims face? So suspicions, whether legitimate or perceived, due to visibility, whether it's your hijab or your beard or other types of clothing. A lot of microaggressions, other forms of major and minor Islamophobic actions. These are some of the challenges we face all the time. Oh, you speak English so well. Wow, your scarf is so pretty. You know, like, okay, thanks. Snap judgment that are perpetuated by media stereotypes, whether legitimate or perceived. You know, I've come through our Costco in Richmond many, many times, and the same checkout lady 3 different times has asked me where I'm from and why my English is so clean. And I'm like, you've seen me so many times. How many times are we going to talk about this, you know? It's the same judgments. And again, fear of asking for questions and asking for help. And a big one that I want to spend a couple minutes talking about is fear of law enforcement and figures of authorities. Whether this does or does not include librarians, I don't know about that. But anybody in a position of authority, there's a little bit of hesitation these days about interacting with that, because there's just, you know, too much potential for being targeted, for being brown or black or Muslim. And yeah, autism and behaviors and different things that are not understood by the community at large, and it's a very difficult intersection right there. So I wrote an article last year about being Muslim, brown, and disabled and being a potential for targeting and arrest. And I really think that this might feed into some of the reasons why, you know, sometimes Muslims with disabilities and autism hesitate to be fully integrated into public settings, whether it's the library system or anywhere else. And I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but I want to read a little bit of it to you. In it, I talk about a couple situations where I was out in the community with my son, and it was a little worrisome to me because I wasn't sure if we were going to get called out by somebody. So for example, last year on an outing to a local park with a friend and her 2 sons, we descended the steps to a walking path in the park, and my son lost his stuffing. Only this time, I was pretty cool about it because I know how to handle it. I sent my youngest son along with my friend and her boys to walk ahead while I waited things out with Anish. He was angry and jumping around with force, getting up in my face with intimidating behavior, stopping just short of aggression. I stood my ground because I know my son and I know he's not going to hurt me, and while folks around us eyeballed us and cleared a circle around us, I spoke with him softly and made sure we stayed safe. And soon enough he found his calm and we continued walking. And I wasn't rattled by his meltdown, not in the least. I was more rattled by the fear of how folks may react to us. This time, however, I wasn't thinking about myself or my headscarf as the attractor of attention, but I was thinking of my son, in his strength and his loudness, all couched in his beautiful brown skin. Because at 17, and now he's 18, my son Danish is not a boy anymore. He is a young man in the full physical sense of the word. He is taller than me and has started shaving his rather impressive facial hair and has the appetite, strength, and features and characteristics of a man. And when you pair his physicalness with how he looks as a young man of color, a young autistic Muslim man, it's cause for me to worry. And I reference this by a story that came out last year. Just this week, a Muslim boy aged 6 with Down syndrome, who was described by his father to be nonverbal, was reported to the police by a substitute teacher who says he heard Muhammad Suleiman say the words boom and Allah repeatedly. Said his father, they claim he's a terrorist. This is so stupid. This is discrimination. It's not implied discrimination, it's 100% discrimination. Upon the teacher reporting the boy, the 6-year-old boy and his family became subjects of a police and social services investigation. So these are just, 2 examples, but this is part of what's facing us out there. And if you combine the different challenges and the interesting things that are part of autism living, with being brown or black and Muslim, it can be a little scary at times when you're out in the public setting. So some statistics to consider. According to a report released by the American Journal of Public Health, people with mental or physical disabilities were 13% more arrested as juveniles or young adults than people with no disabilities. If you're black, disability widens the margin of the chance of arrest by 17%, according to the report, and more than 55% of blacks with disabilities were arrested by age of 28. In an article published by Reuters, Aaron McCauley, who's a policy analyst and management doctoral student at Cornell University, said the arrest rate for blacks with disabilities was horrifyingly high. And arrest rates for people of color with disabilities are also very high in general. Nearly 1/3 of those surveyed had been arrested by age 28, and for those with disabilities, the chances of being arrested arose to 43%. But the risk fell disproportionately on young people of color. Blacks with disabilities are at the greatest risk of arrest, nearly double the 28% of whites with disabilities. More than 46% of Hispanics with disabilities could expect to be arrested as young children or young adults, the study found. The experience of arrest for high people with disabilities, especially for people of color with disabilities, and the steps need to be taken to ameliorate this, McCauley said. Let's add that to some statistics. According to a report from the FBI, the number of reported hate crimes in 2016 increased by nearly 5% to more than 6,100. And as long as that's been true, hate crimes based on race were by far the biggest category, with more than half of the reported hate crimes incidents motivated by race, ethnicity, or ancestry. Among those, nearly half were anti-black crimes, nearly 10% were anti-Latino, and 1 in 5 were anti-white, although white people were much less likely, while accounting for total population, to suffer a hate crime than a minority group. Hate crimes motivated by religion were the next biggest category, making up for more than 20% of reported incidences. Jewish and Muslim people are the 2 most common targets in this category, with 54% and more than 24%, respectively, of religiously motivated hate crimes committed against them. So this is where the fear stems from. I mean, the statistics don't lie. And I spent some time talking about this because when we talk about how we can help Muslims with autism in our library systems, this is a real fear, and maybe it's not necessarily, geared towards libraries or librarians or people of authority in libraries, but just people of authority in general. The fear is out there of law enforcement, of people in authority, and of just things going south. So I think it's important to keep that in mind. So how can the libraries and library systems be more welcoming and inclusive to Muslims with autism and their families? In my mind, it's a couple of simple things. One is it's making your services known. So like anyone living with autism, this is no different from Muslim families living with autism. We're overwhelmed. We don't know what services libraries have to offer us. You don't know that that it's a place where we can come to attend programs and be welcomed and to learn more about what is out there for us to avail as a Muslim family with autism. So I would suggest putting up flyers or offering to put together an autism discussion at local mosques. Great way to reach the population, or Islamic schools. Reaching out to Muslim autism families and individuals via social media with targeted messaging during key times like Ramadan. It's Ramadan right now. Ramadan greetings would be awesome, You do simple things like Ramadan greetings and targeted messagings in your library systems. Muslims already are aware, and they know, hey, I think that's a friendly place that I can go there, right? Within libraries, I would suggest having a dedicated section with information about Muslim disability organizations as well as autism organizations and resources in general. And I'm sure your libraries have this, but I'm sure you didn't have a section that was geared towards Muslim organizations working on these issues as well. And, you know, we just can include that in there and then be able to advertise that that kind of information and programming is out there in targeted messaging. I think that could help bring more Muslims into the library. Muslims with autism and other disabilities come into the libraries. Also, I would partner with schools to encourage library usage. Islamic schools and special needs and public school systems as well, using targeted messaging that welcomes folks from all religions and cultures. I think that would be really helpful as well. And I think it's important to understand that autism and other disabilities are still stigmatized within various Muslim communities. And I realize I spelled communities wrong. How embarrassing. Apologies. As few as 8 years ago, I was one of the only Muslims to openly and actively discuss autism and share our family's autism living online, focusing on that intersection of faith and autism. It's fascinating to me to note that when I started sharing our stories online and just kind of being honest and real and vulnerable about what this was like, while keeping certain things private, because some things are always meant to be private in our life, and at the same time gently calling out our communities for their lack of stepping up. The flood of people who came to me privately and publicly to say, my God, I'm not the only one, I've been suffering in silence in my home, and I'm so happy to see that I'm not the only one, Muslim and non-Muslim at the same time. It was pretty phenomenal. And to see that from 8 years ago to now, to the open discussions and sharing and other Muslims with disabilities feeling comfortable sharing their stories, is pretty cool. And it's important to understand that if Muslims with autism and Muslim autism families that they're still struggling to some degree with engaging with the public and public institutions, that innately feeds into the possibility of avoiding coming to the library. Like we talked about the statistics and the fears out there about engaging in public settings, about perhaps staying more insular within our own communities. I mean, that's obviously going to trickle over to library systems as well. And of course, common library misconceptions may bar some Muslim families from coming into libraries, just like any individual with autism or any autism family. Same goes for the Muslim community. So, that's what I have for you today. Questions? Anyone have any questions that I can help you with now? Yes?
So I live and work in Minnesota, and Minnesota is one of the states with a increasing Muslim community.
Yeah, a big Somali community out there.
Yeah, and we are doing a lot of work with our Somali community throughout the library system. Do you know of any organizations in Minnesota specifically
Specifically based in Minnesota? I haven't heard of specifically Minnesota-based organizations that are focused on disability or autism, but a lot of the ones that I mentioned here are national organizations, and so they will work in any state. And like Musa might be, centralized in Chicago and do the majority of their work here, but they are a national organization, and they are working with mosques and masjids in Minnesota as well. So I would utilize them. Yeah. Yes.
I have a similar question, but for Massachusetts. Right? It's another national organization, but are there anything like in the Boston area?
I feel like there is. I would have to go back into my notes and look and see what organizations might be Boston-based. But I would give the same answer right now that I gave to the lady over there, that I would avail the national organizations who are working are all around the country on these issues. And they're not particularly married to just one region. That being said, some of them are more active in one region than another, but they're always looking to expand. A lot of these are DC-based as well, and the DC-based organizations are pretty good about working up and down the East Coast at the same time. You had a question too?
No, my question was, given what you were talking about some of the fears of coming into public places, what would libraries be able to, like if libraries wanted to do a program, say, with you and your son, to destigmatize
Right.
that, or introduce them to the other community, or get families like yours to engage in existing programs, what would be the best approach to reach out?
I think it's
to
a
get people
combination,
participating?
well, I think it's a combination of good messaging and then reaching out to stakeholders. Like, I think reaching out to your area, there's community centers in your area, Muslim community centers, your area mosque, if there are Islamic schools around. If they're not, even in the public school system, or if there's autism schools, they're going to have Muslim students there. I mean, my son goes to a private autism school in Richmond, but he's one of like 5 Muslim students at that school. I think reaching out there, you know, saying that we're developing a program that is specifically geared towards this, and this is our messaging and advertising like that. So it's really incumbent upon the stakeholders that you reach out to, tied into what your messaging is, and then, you know, really good advertising. I think a lot of the problem is things are just not well known. Muslims with disabilities aren't aware of what libraries have to offer, and libraries are unaware of the stigmas or the fears that, you know, Muslims with disabilities might have in public settings. It's a lack of awareness, I think.
I think to add to that, I really appreciated what you said about bringing in the schools.
Yeah.
We've had a lot of successful impact in working with the cultural family liaisons in our school districts throughout the county, and that helps really build that trust. Because to what you're saying, you know, libraries, whether they're standalone or a department of a county, there
Right.
could be a very different stigma about the library as an institution. And so having that partnership with the schools, we're just finding a lot of really great opportunities. So I think that's really
Yeah.
great to mention.
Yeah.
Just kind of along with hers, with how do you reach, I run an autism organization in central Illinois, and how do we reach out to the Muslim community to let them know that they are welcome to join us in everything that we do?
Yeah, that is a fantastic question, because that has been one of my major beefs out in Richmond. I am actively involved with the Autism Society of Central Virginia and have fundraised for them for 8 years. They have done such phenomenal programming that has been helpful to us on every step in our journey. And I have Muslims in Richmond with Muslims with autism and their families reach out to me all the time about how do I do guardianship, and what's the IEP process, and how do I apply for SSI benefits, and oh my God, what are you doing about puberty, and I need to get an advocate to work with my kid because we're not getting what we need on his IEP, and I keep saying, hey, go to the Autism Society of Central Virginia. They have helped me with everything. I don't want to be your personal layer of information. I work full time and I have a son with autism and I have 2 other kids, but I also don't want to say no to offering help. I want you to go to this organization who helped me and they'll help you too.
Right.
So I think, my beef with ASCVA has been, you're not in enough pockets around the community. You're doing great work in the autism community and partnerships with like our local hospitals and schools, and we know about all that when we're fundraising and we're talking about their programming. But how about reaching out to our mosques? How about reaching out to our synagogues? How about reaching out to our Hindu temples? How about reaching out to, whatever, our gurdwalas, our Sikh gurdwalas, we have those in Richmond too. I don't think they know that you're out there. I don't think they know the work that you're doing.
Well, and I think there's
Yeah.
a fear of them reaching out too, like you said.
Yeah,
And for the library one, our library, we work closely with them. We have some after-hours events specifically for people with disabilities.
yeah.
So they can feel the library, get used to it, bring their kids in, let them know that, libraries are no longer the quiet place. They have sensory bags, things like that to make it more welcoming. And that kind of helps build that
Yeah.
community. of the library.
Absolutely. It's funny because I think you all are aware in the autism community when April rolls around, we kind of get tired of talking about autism awareness. How long are we going to be talking about awareness? Why isn't it about action and acceptance? And it is. But honestly speaking, when it comes to Muslim communities and other faith groups, it still is awareness. I mean, that's just one of the biggest pieces of the puzzle is that connection between autism organizations and between autism programming in libraries and in other public settings, of Muslim communities being aware of that, of you guys being aware of Muslim communities, and about bringing those two things together, making that connection. Yes.
Your story mirrors actually the work that my agency does as well, with the disparities of families of communities of color.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate your statistics as it relates to the police officers and the stigma that our children get as they become adults, especially older.
Especially older.
As they get
so
older, because
frightening.
they have tunnel vision.
Yeah.
And, you know, they bumping into, you know, the
Yeah.
different people in the stores. And I've noticed that when we go into more affluent areas, they are more understanding because the awareness is more profound, but in communities of color. So
Yeah.
that's why it's so important for in the black and brown communities, and for us to really spread that awareness, but for the people that are in other communities, the white communities, for them to let their counterparts know that our children are the same. I mean,
Exactly.
it's a blatant prejudice, even amongst our own people.
It is.
So, and the thing about it is that people aren't unapologetically speaking about what's going on in black and brown communities as it relates to disabilities, but it's just time to come from behind the screens
Right.
and just talk about what it is.
So you're absolutely right. I agree. I think we're doing a lot of talking from behind the screens. You know, there's phenomenal discussions happening with disability activists on Twitter and on Facebook and on other forms of social media. But out in the real world setting is where that needs to enter into, right?
Right.
And it's a legitimate fear, especially as your population grows. I mean, you don't. Autism doesn't end at 18. I mean, I say that all the time. It
Gets
doesn't
worse.
end at age 6, it doesn't end at 10, it doesn't end at age 18, right?
Exactly.
And the programming and the inclusion and the kindness that was given towards Danish as a child,
It goes away.
it goes away.
It does.
He's 18 now,
Yep.
and he still needs. You know, my son is significantly impaired, for the lack of a better word. He's just he's profoundly impacted by his autism,
Right.
and he needs a lot of support.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a whole different experience taking him into a public bathroom when he's 18 with his mother than when he was 6 with his
Oh, I just go in.
right?
I just go in.
Oh, I go in
I
too.
do. I knock on doors. Mommy coming in. Mother's coming in.
But when you pair a person of color with visibly Muslim with public setting, it's
Right.
a trifecta for a lot
Sure
of fear. And that could feed into, you know, the lack of people coming into library systems and in other public settings, because you don't know how you're going to be perceived, and you don't know that it's a welcoming place, which all stems back to the fact that it's still an awareness piece.
It
It
is.
still is an awareness piece, you know? Yeah, I'm sorry.
First of all, I want to thank you for your awesome presentation. I am a member of the Arc of Illinois, and my question to you is it possible, being in Illinois and all of these resources that you shared,
Yeah.
if I could get a copy of this?
Sure, yeah.
I would be so grateful, because one of our programs is our Illinois Lifespan Information and Resource,
Yeah.
and we have 47 chapters around the states. And so I'd love to be able to share this information, not only in Illinois, but to have the resource for other people to call.
I'm assuming the presentations here today
The
will be available.
presentations are all going to be available as a
Yeah.
link to the Targeting Autism blog under the resources section. And I'm going to take, you know, those organizations and list them separately as well.
So then, actually, I have a list that I have prepared that I've used in other conferences. I just list out them all. I'll send that to you as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You all can get a chance to stretch while